So hello and welcome to the Kendall MMA channel. I hope everybody had an amazing new year. I'm just getting over my hangover, so I might be a little bit choppy in this video, but with 2025 on the horizon, basically it's here now officially. We need some changes from the UFC this year. We can't go back and do the same things we did in 2024. So for this video, I have 5 things that I think the UFC should change for the upcoming 2025 year. Now, as always, if you enjoyed this video, enjoyed this channel, leave me a like down below, hit the subscribe button for me. We're going crazy for 2025. There will be no more inactivity from me throughout the entire year. I'm going to go crazy and we're going to make sure this channel is back up to where it used to be, back to the normal standard. But getting on with the video, let's hop into the top 5 things I think the UFC should change for 2025. Now, starting off with number 1, and these are not in any particular order, but number 1 is the UFC should not go back to the Apex whatsoever. So currently, right now, the Apex is down under construction until the summertime. We should not go back to the Apex at all during this time when it opens back up. I do not care how much money the UFC saves with their Apex. It should not be a thing. And if we do go back, at the very, very, very least, it should be like a couple times, maybe once a month. I don't want to see the Apex 3 times a month. It's just not really feasible. It's not entertaining. They don't put really any effort into the fight nights anymore. They just throw a bunch of fighters who they can get on a card and just say, hey, you guys go eat this. And even sometimes the main event isn't even that good. We just have a guy who might be unranked who gets a unnecessary jump up against a top contender who's already a top 5 guy in that weight class, and just like, here, eat this, take this. No, I don't want to see that anymore. I want to see good, clear-cut contenders. I want to see top 10 guys at all times in the main events of fight nights. Sometimes it might be hard. I'm not saying every fight night needs to be an absolute banger with the best names on it, but at the very least, don't make us eat shit for every single fight night, especially in the Apex. I'm begging you, do not do this, because as the year goes on, it just gets so tiring. Sitting here every single Saturday night, watching a card from pretty much almost start to finish. Even if I'm not live streaming the entire thing, I have the fights on in the background and I'm just not amped. I'm not excited. I'm tired. I'm already gassed out by the time we hit the main event because some of the fights just aren't really entertaining whatsoever. And I think when you already have a pretty bad fight night and it's in the Apex, it just makes it 10 times more boring. But on the flip side of that, when we have an amazing fight night with a bunch of KOs and finishes, and it's in the Apex, it just kind of makes it not feel as exciting. When you have the big roar of the crowd and everybody's chanting and screaming and going, oh my God, and it's just not there for an Apex, and it's just like a huge highlight reel KO, it just doesn't feel the same whatsoever. And I think the last card of the year, the UFC Tampa, just pretty much proved that. That was an amazing fight night with a bunch of KOs in front of a crowd. If that was in the Apex, I think it would feel not as special as it kind of was to end the year. And kind of moving on to number 2, 1 and 2 kind of go inside with each pause, but 1 and 2 kind of combine. We do overall need better fight nights. Again, like I mentioned before, sometimes these fight nights, it just feels like the UFC is just throwing them together and saying, hey, we have a fight night for you. Here you go. And I don't know, maybe it's the ESPN deal. I don't know what time that exactly ends, or maybe they renewed their contract with ESPN. But I think maybe they might be trying to just put on fight nights to satisfy the ESPN corporation and not really as a fan base. Maybe it does require them to move on to another TV deal. I think they do prefer ESPN. I think I read that in some report that they want to stay with ESPN. So maybe we're just not there yet. I don't know what it is with the UFC. It just feels like they have so many events a year, and some of these fighters just aren't active enough to keep up with the UFC having cards every single week. Maybe you sign on more fighters. Maybe you try to do different avenues. Maybe you, again, find a new TV deal, have less cards a year. Honestly, I am perfectly content with we have, 10 less UFC fight nights a year if they can make the quality of them just that much better. Again, if we're having just 5 or 10 less fight nights, but the quality of them is just absolutely amazing. We're having top contenders. We're having top 5 guys. We're having title elimination bouts on these fight nights. I would not mind that whatsoever. I don't want to see 2 unranked guys or like 1 really bad heavyweight getting a jump up in the rankings against a top 10 heavyweight and have it be an absolute shit fight. Shamil Gaziev, I'm looking at you. But I would much rather not have that, skip that fight night week, have one for next week where you can just combine 2 fight nights into one and make it a way, way better fight night. I just think the UFC, they just didn't put much effort into the fight nights in 2024, and I hope in 2025 they can turn that around and make this year way, way better. But moving on to number three, if I had to rank this by what I want to see the most, I think number three would be at my number one spot, but I didn't feel like organizing it. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But number three, what we need for 2025 is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. This has to happen. It probably won't happen. If I had to bet my chips, if I had to go all in, I wouldn't bet on this happening. I think I would probably just fold because I don't think Jon Jones is going to fight Tom Aspinall. It's not going to happen. I think he's made it pretty clear cut that he is not looking forward to fighting him. He would rather fight Derek Lewis. He would rather fight other, lesser heavyweights than Tom Aspinall. He would rather fight Alex Pereira than Tom Aspinall. And I don't think we're going to see that fight. But I am telling you, if this fight does end up happening, it's going to be the biggest fight of 2025. I don't care about Conor McGregor returning back. He's supposed to fight Logan Paul now. That's dumb. Probably do a whole video about that. But I think Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones is going to be the biggest fight, I think, of the decade. I think of the 2020s, I think that fight would be the best fight just overall hype-wise. And I've been hearing through the grapevine that some Saudi company is going to pay Jon Jones $50 million to fight Tom Aspinall. Now, will that happen? Maybe, and it's possible. The Saudis do have their money, man. So maybe they can make that happen. I don't know if I like the idea of it being in a Saudi arena, though. Sometimes the crowds there just aren't the best. But if we were to put this in the UK or some other European country, and even in the US, honestly, I think the European countries have way better crowds than the US. But I think at the bare minimum in the US, I would be all for it. If the Saudis want to fork up that much money to pay Jon Jones, I would be all for it. Now, will it happen again? I just doubt it. I don't think it's going to happen. But overall, even if the Saudis do find a way to fork up enough money to pay Jon Jones, I don't know how it's going to work with the UFC and their negotiations. I mean, if they are paying Jon Jones that much money, I'm pretty sure the UFC owes them a huge favor. And so that goes into negotiations. And so overall, I just think it might be too much money. I am 100% sure the Saudis have the money, and if they want to have Jon Jones fight in their country, they will make it happen because this fight is huge. But on the UFC side, I mean, there's going to be strings attached to this. I don't know. I'm not saying that the Saudi Arabia is a corrupt country. I don't know. I just don't know how it would work financially with the UFC and with Saudi Arabia as a country and how they're going to be able to pay Jon Jones. And there's just no way I can see a country giving $50 million to the UFC and being like, hey, here you guys go, have this fight. It's going to be something to go along with it. I just don't know. I think if anything, it's all going to fall apart and we're not going to see Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Unless Jon Jones just one day wakes up and is like, you know what, I'll fight Tom Aspinall, which I don't see happening. But moving on to number 4 on this list, I think we need more activity from the UFC fighters. I do not like fighters only fighting once a year. I think that is probably one of the worst things for the UFC as a company and for our entertainment as a fan base. It just doesn't really bode well when we see Justin Gaethje once a year. Justin Gaethje, I mean, whether he wins or loses, always has fun fights for the most part, and seeing him once a year, I think, is pretty criminal. Now, honestly, he probably does need, a good time off every time he fights because he takes a ton of damage. But when it comes to some of these other fighters who aren't taking that much damage, why is Payne Talbot been out for so long? I know he's fighting soon in early 2025, but he's been out for so long. He just came off an easy 20-second KO win where he took no damage. We need to see these guys more often. I don't want to see guys fighting again once, twice a year. I want more Kevin Hollands. I want to see more Joaquin Buckleys. I want to see the guys who actually want to make some money. I want to see the guys who actually want to, work their way up the rankings and try to get a title shot. Because when you're active, man, I think you just perform better. When you're fighting every 3 or 4 months or so, I feel like you're more switched on early into a fight. And when you're not fighting for a whole year, you get rust. You don't really perform as well. You're slow out the gates. You got to warm up into the fight. And sometimes it just doesn't make fights that exciting. I mean, look at Colby Covington when he fought Edwards. He was out for so long, and it just felt like he never got into that fight because I think he was rusty. And it's the same thing when he fought Joaquin Buckley. He just been out for too long, and he just doesn't really come into a fight just switched on and ready to go, especially when Buckley was already fighting pretty consistently beforehand. He was already, this is normal to him now. When fighters are fighting often, it becomes very normal for you to fight every 3 to 4 months, and you're not going to be, as nervous as you usually would, not as switched on as you normally would. And I think overall, just from an entertainment standpoint, from a fan standpoint, when fighters are fighting every 3 to 4 months, it allows for us to get more connected. It also allows for the casual fan to remember their face, remember their name, and for them to like them. Because let's be real here, casual fans kind of what make the sport. Like, I do know the word casual has a lot of negative connotation to it. However, that is what makes up the majority of any fan base, is the casual fan. And when you're a fighter and you're fighting often and you're getting your face known by the casual fan base, that only gets you more recognition, only more attention for your fights, and more money in your pocket. So I think when fighters fight more often, as long as they're not getting KO'd, I think it benefits everybody. It benefits the UFC, it benefits them, and it benefits us. So I think at the very least, we should see UFC fighters fight 3 times a year, 2 times at the very minimum, and like certain circumstances. Once a year, I think, is almost unacceptable unless there's some sort of crazy injury going on or something really bad in their personal life. But I think if everything is all good, all systems go, no injuries, no nothing, 3 times a year, I think, should be the bare minimum for fighters. But moving on to number 5, the last thing I want to see the UFC change for 2025 is press conferences should not be a day before the weigh-ins. That is, I think, one of the stupidest things that the UFC does, is having these press conferences literally a day before the weigh-ins. Why? These fighters are already drained. They're already pretty much sucked out of water. They have nothing in their system. There's no way they can be entertaining. There's no way they can be fun at all on the mic when they don't have any energy whatsoever to say anything, because they have nothing in their system. A lot of these fighters are already starting their weight cut a week out. And when it gets down to that last couple days, they're really sucking themselves dry. So why are we having one of the most important events before the fight that gets people really, really hyped, where we can really see how good the trash talk is and how personable some of these fighters can be, a day before the biggest part of their entire fight camp is making weight? I think the biggest part of these fighters' fight camps is just being able to make weight. The fight, I think, is the easy part. Getting in there and actually fighting is, I think, is the easy part of being a fighter. I think making weight is the hardest thing they have to do. Yet we're having one of the biggest events pre-fight one day before these guys have to make sure they make their weight. I mean, what are we doing? Like, at least have it a week before, like 2 weeks before. I think at the latest, do it that Tuesday, have the fight night event, have your whatever event you had on that Saturday, take Sunday off, take Monday off, do some interviews for that, and then Tuesday, do a big press conference. Thursday night should not know. Thursday night should not be a thing that we should do for these fighters. It makes them, every single time I see a fighter up there, majority of them are already pretty much tired. They're worn out. They have no energy. They're lifeless. And I think that only leads them to say the same things every time, which is, can't wait till Saturday night, in their muffled, super scratchy voice. No, these press conferences should not be a day before they weigh in. I think maybe even after the weigh-ins. Maybe instead of the whole ceremonial weigh-ins, we do a quick, 30-minute press conference. I mean, the ceremonial weigh-in takes 30 minutes itself. So maybe replace that with a good press conference. I don't know. I just want to see these fighters actually have some life to them when they're on the stage, and not them completely drained out and at their most boring state where they don't even want to talk. So there you guys go. That was 5 things I think the UFC should change for 2025. Kind of a quick video today. I was a bit hungover. Actually, I was massively hungover. I didn't get to bed till like 5 p.m. I was so drained. But I think for tomorrow, I'm going to go live. And I think that following day, I'm going to do a big 2025 end of the year video. It might take me a couple of days to edit, but I want to do a big video to end the year of 2025, 2024, not 2025. What am I saying? So be on the lookout for that video. But with that being said, I'm out of here, guys.